Okay, we're live. Hey, Eric,
Hey, Kevin.
I gotta ask you a question to start out. How long have
Sure.
you been doing this? How long have you been at Symantec?
Over 20 years now. A little
Yeah.
bit over 20 years.
So I've been doing it a little over 20 years as well. I think we started around the same time at Symantec. Um, how long has it been since somebody asked you, "Hey, tell me the truth. Did you guys write viruses?"
You know, it happens pretty often, but I have to say, like, the occurrence of that is going down a lot. These days, you hear about all these attacks, and they're attributed now, to nation states. The FBI has indictments for individuals. So, I think in the sort of the general populace, people now equate cyber attacks more to things like nation states and less to, hey, aren't you guys writing that kind of thing now?
Right.
Obviously, there's so many attackers out there and so many pieces of malicious software out there every single day that let me tell you, no need for us to be writing anything.
I think it's probably been about
Enough
10
work.
years since anybody asked me that, but I'm shocked every time they do. And then when you tell them no, they always seem a little disappointed. Like then they would be thrilled if you were putting one over on everybody.
Because it's a better conspiracy theory if it was happening.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let me ask you the kind of questions a little more common now. WastedLocker, how did it get that name?
Yeah, it got that name. It's a piece of ransomware, and one of the things it does is encrypts your files on your drive. And when they do that file encryption, they rename your files. And what WastedLocker does is it adds the extension .wasted to any of the encrypted files, and so thus the name WastedLocker.
Yeah. Yeah, I think when you tell people now that how it got its name, any of these things, they generally seem to be really disappointed as well. They think there's some really cool reason behind it, right? All right. So we've started. I'm contractually obligated to do a couple things. First, I should introduce ourselves to everybody. Hi, I'm Kevin Haley. I'm a director at Symantec Security Response, which is part of the Symantec Enterprise division at Broadcom. Joining me today is Eric Chan, official title, Technical Director in Symantec Enterprise Division. He's also been involved for over 20 years in threat hunting. He's made some pretty significant discoveries. If you haven't seen the 0 Hour documentary, I highly recommend it, highly advise you do. And Eric and his team discovered something called WastedLocker, which you now know the reason for that name. So we're going to talk about how we detected it, how we prevented it, and some of the other things, some of the interesting things about it. Bit of housekeeping before we move on. If you want to submit a question, I think we'll have plenty of time, or at least some time for questions. There is the question tab on your screen. Use that, enter your question there. If we don't get to it during the session, we'll follow up with an email and answer your question there, but we'll try to get to it. There's also that attachment tab. We're going to put a lot of good things in there, including access to the research that we published about WastedLocker. So be sure to check that out. Wait till after we're done, but check that out. And when you're done for the deliverables you want, we're actually asking you to rate it. Wait till we're done and then give us a rating, hopefully a high one. And if you want a recording, if you want to revisit this, then or send it to your friends, there'll be a link available, and you'll access it with the same URL, same link you had before. Okay, that's housekeeping. So let me give like a 5-second summary of WastedLocker. I assume most people on here are familiar with it, but if anybody isn't, I'll give the 5-second view, and then let me ask some questions of you. Let's see. So this is a ransomware created by a group that calls themselves E-Corp, self-named after the television show Mr. Robot. They're actually, or at least some of the people in the gang are well known. In fact, they've been wanted by the FBI for some time now, yet to be arrested, still obviously quite active. And we discovered that this ransomware was attacking about or over 30 different companies, all in the Fortune 100 in the US. And we were able actually to discover the threat and stop it before the encryption actually happened. So, I mean, that's the 5-cent tour of it. The end result is we actually it got coverage in the New York Times. Now, we've seen a lot of coverage about ransomware in the trade press. It gets talked about all the time, but there's so much of it, it rarely rises to the level where you get kind of this kind of media coverage. Eric, why is that? What is it that's really special or different about this threat?
Yeah, look, there's a couple of things here. So first, it's ransomware. And yeah, ransomware today is still run of the mill, but we know from many other cases that if your organization gets hit by ransomware, you could be talking about hundreds of millions of dollars in damage. But in this case, it went sort of above that. And in particular, the reason why it was so concerning is twofold. First is we were able to attribute this thing to EvilCorp. So this group, as you mentioned, is a group that has a leader who was wanted by the FBI. They estimate over $100 million in damage from EvilCorp over the last 10 years. So this isn't just like some small new cybercrime gang. These guys have been in operation for over a decade, have $100 million worth of damages ascribed to their name, and their leader is wanted and has a $5 million reward over his head. Right, so we're talking about a sophisticated, persistent group who does what they want, and if they're able to infiltrate your network, that's very concerning. They will likely get to the end, which is deploying their ransomware and ultimately holding your network, your organization, for extortion. And so then the second thing was then the victim list. And that's really what caused us to have it hit our radar first, is we saw it hit a whole bunch of U.S. organizations, and only U.S. organizations that were in the Fortune 100 all at the same time. And that's something pretty rare, to be honest. I think the last time that I recall so many organizations of that sort of, let's call it caliber, sort of hit all at the same time was maybe WannaCry. And WannaCry was just, generally widespread and not so targeted. And here we see them targeting U.S. Well-known brands, which is pretty rare, to be honest.
Well, let's talk about that. And you may have noticed my camera's frozen. So if I'm not stunned by this news, I'll try to fix it. But so we had, we're reporting 150 websites got infected, and that's how they got into the organization. That doesn't really sound very targeted, getting people who went to 150 different websites. So
yeah,
what's that all about?
How they infected these organizations was quite unique as well. Typically when people talk about targeting organizations, they talk about them sending them emails, for example, targeted emails to the organizations, or maybe scanning the network for their open IP address space to find open RDP servers or vulnerabilities they have on their network. But in this case, what this organization did was actually something quite sophisticated. Which was use what you call these watering holes. They basically were able to breach one of the largest newspaper publishers in the United States, who is responsible for dozens of well-known popular newspaper websites and also print. And by breaching this newspaper organization, they were able to get on to all of these newspaper websites. But what EvilCorp did that was a bit special, your average cybercrime gang, what they would have done was once they infected these sites, anyone who visited the sites, they would have deployed their threat to those computers. And that might be, millions of machines all over the world, consumers, enterprises, etc.
Right.
But what EvilCorp did was when you visited that website, only if you were a select organization that they were interested in, which turns out to be these very, high revenue generating, well-known brand names in the United States, did they actually deploy their threat? So if you were an average home user and you happened to visit this particular newspaper website, they would ignore you. They would just deliver you the normal article and not deliver you anything else. But if you came from one of these high, well-known organizations, they would deliver the threat to your machine.
So these guys had the potential, being on this website and some of these others, to infect millions of people. But
that's right.
That wasn't. And if you would think you're running ransomware, that'd be very appealing. I would get all these people, but that's not the game they were in.
Yeah, the ransomware game has changed. We call it sort of big hunting, big game ransomware. And instead of going after, let's say, millions of home users and trying to get $300 from each of them, that's a lot of effort, to herd millions of users and just try to collect a little bit from each of them. Instead, what they do is they focus on big game. They focus on big organizations and spend more time trying to infiltrate and breaching those organizations to try to get just $1 million from them rather than $300 from each.
Right. So they do a watering hole attack. They get their targets. They drop malware on there, and then all the files get encrypted.
Well, it's not so simple, right? So one, most of these organizations are well protected, first of all. Okay. Second, the computer that happened to visit that newspaper website is probably just some random office worker in this larger organization. Okay. And that random office worker may not have direct access to anything of importance. If they deploy the ransomware, then that ransomware would just ransomware that single office worker's machine. But what these guys are going after, what these guys want, is they want to ransomware or bring down things like critical database servers, file servers, the email server, manufacturing devices, the machines that are running your factory floor. Because they know if they bring down those things, that's costing the company money. And the company is more likely and willing to pay the ransom. So they have to actually go through a whole series of steps in order to do that.
So the first ransomware attack now is going to be inside that, breach the environment and be in there running around for how long?
Yeah, we call that the dwell time. And the average dwell time right now we're seeing from ransomware groups is about 7 to 10 days. So they get in and it takes them between 7 and 10 days before they're finally able to deploy their ransomware. But that's the average. If you look at Evil Corp, they have a decade history. In some cases, they were inside networks for 6 months, just waiting for that final piece for them to put into play for them in order to deploy their ransomware. So these guys are persistent and they'll be patient.
I'm saying this sounds like it's an advanced persistent threat. And, we think ransomware is a criminal organization. Clearly these guys were, but they're an APT too, right?
Yeah, I mean, these guys are probably one of the most sophisticated cybercrime gangs we have out there. We always use this sort of joking analogy. These guys aren't two guys in the basement in Kansas somewhere.
Right. So they get into the organization through this SOAK Ghoulish. Did I say that right?
Yeah, SOAK Ghoulish. Yeah.
So what's that? Is that some tool they built?
So basically, it's a framework that whether it's part of their group or it's associated with their group is maybe up for debate a little bit. This framework or toolkit has also been used to deliver other malicious threats. So that's why we believe it's sort of sold as a service for usage, but it's very much associated with Evil Corp. And what it does is it's that thing that I described that allows you to waterhole a site and then selectively infect users who visit you. And what they were doing with the framework was delivering a little pop-up that pretended that you needed to update your browser when you visited this newspaper website. You clicked OK, and then little did you know, now their toolkit was running on your machine.
Okay, so now the toolkit's on the machine, they're in the org. What do they do next?
So basically what they do next is they do a little bit of reconnaissance. They check to see, what your user is. Are you an administrator? They see what other user accounts you have access to. They begin scanning the network to see what other machines you're connected to. And the first thing they want to do after that is basically elevate their rights. They want to basically get some sort of administrator access, whether it's local administrator first, or then begin to jump to other machines from your machine to find other user accounts, ultimately to find domain admin.
So all this is very typical as well. I mean, are there things here that are unique to Evil Corp, or things they did that are kind of different than kind of the standard breach or smash and grab attack?
Yeah, the general playbook that they have here, which is get on a machine, escalate, and do lateral traverse. Those are sort of the normal steps as we describe them. Is pretty similar to other breaches. And even in this case, they were using Cobalt Strike. Cobalt Strike is a sort of off-the-shelf pen testing toolkit to do those sort of lateral traverse and escalation steps. So it would be quite similar to some other things that we see happening out there.
So why would you use open source software if you're Evil Corp, the baddest guys in the world? Why wouldn't you write your own really cool evil tool?
It's a great question, Kevin. It's really a question of cost. They can spend a lot of effort and money and time developing all of these tools, or they can get them pre-done off the shelf. And these tools like Cobalt Strike aren't static and singular in nature. Every single day, Cobalt Strike is being added to. To increase its sophistication, to try to bypass security products, to add new features. And that's all a cost that they don't have to incur by just using Cobalt Strike.
Well, if you're in the organization too, and you're as a defender of the organization, and you discover Cobalt Strike in there, you don't know who it is, right? Anybody could be using. Yeah. In fact, lots of people are using that tool.
Yeah, attribution could become very difficult at that stage of the attack if they're just using Cobalt Strike. And you as an administrator, you might even see this, semi-often in your organization, such that you go, oh, another Cobalt Strike CAC. This might be a quote-unquote script kiddie who just happened to get in and just happened to pull this tool off the shelf. So I'll just reimage the machine and move on. And not realizing that actually you had a sophisticated actor in your environment, and you might need to double down and triple check that they didn't get something like one leaked credential and are simply going to come back or have some other backdoor implanted inside your network.
So I'm in the SOC and I've seen this, and I'm going, okay, well, no big deal. I don't know how much trouble I'm in, right? You've still got kind of file scanning on the device, on the endpoint to catch this stuff. I mean, our detection is pretty good. Should they be concerned? Should they care at all?
Yeah, it can be difficult, right? I mean, the thing with these attack groups is not only using the off-the-shelf tools, but they're doing something called living off the land, which, probably many of the people listening know that term, but what it means is these attackers are using tools, administrative tools that are on Windows machines already, that administrators use every single day to do all kinds of administrative actions. And they're just using these sort of dual-use tools. So, something like just scanning is not enough. And if you think about actually how we, for example, detected this attack, we use something that we call TAA, which stands for Targeted Attack Analytics. And what we're doing is our SEP, or Semantic Endpoint Protection agent, is monitoring what's happening in all these machines, monitoring all the behaviors of all the processes that are being run, whether it's an administrative tool, a malicious tool, or not. And then we collectively take those and use machine learning to sort of combine all these behaviors together to determine, wait a second, does this look like a pattern of something an administrator would do? Or is the pattern a little bit anomalous and actually maybe more likely a malicious breach happening?
So if I'm a SOC, I'm seeing this little piece and this little piece, and I'm reacting to those, but I'm not capable of really putting all the pieces together like this.
That's right. It's actually very difficult. That's exactly right. It's actually very difficult for a human. I mean, we're not just talking about what did this single process do or what did this single machine do. TAA is actually watching your entire network. We're looking at all machines, and we're looking at temporally as well, over time, what is happening, and combining all of those pieces of data together to say, whoa, you have a breach in your environment, not just, hey, this single machine is infected. You have to remember that they might get on a single machine and just do a tiny little action there, jump to another machine, do something else, jump to another machine and do something else. It's really that collection of all of those behaviors that allow us to trigger. And it's very difficult, obviously, for a human to do. There's so many signals coming in. For you to map those together, it becomes difficult.
Right. So this is TAA, this is an internal tool that we have.
This is actually something that customers can avail of. So it's inside of what we call our EDR product, Endpoint Detection and Response. It is happening on our back end. So we have basically big machine learning, compute power on our back end that is looking at that telemetry that are on these customers' EDR boxes. And then we'll push to your EDR box an incident alert to tell you, hey, look, we see telemetry in your network that looks like a breach and you should investigate.
But it's our guys using that tool that discovered WastedLocker.
Yeah, so there's multiple pieces in play here. So TAA itself was sending automated, because machines doing it, alerts to consoles saying incident, incident, incident. Okay, but TAA can just tell you, I see a breach, I see Cobalt Strike used, I see a little bit of lateral traverse here, I saw privilege escalation, I saw this kind of dual use action that looks anomalous. But TAA doesn't tell you, hey, look, this is Evil Corp. this is WastedLocker, this is ransomware. And so then we have a team of what we call threat hunters, which again is a feature or service that's provided if you have EDR. We have humans actually validating and triaging all these TA alerts, looking for that little extra step. Is this something a little bit more that you need to be looking at? So we have humans actually validating these things. And those incidents, for example, in your EDR console will get flipped. A little icon will show up and it'll say, analyst reviewed, and I'll have a little human icon to tell you that this isn't just a simple automated alert. This is actually a human has looked at this, validated it, verified it, and will add extra information. And in our case, we would have told you, hey, look, this is WastedLocker. So you got to pay attention.
So you're going to get, as an EDR customer, you're getting an immediate response or notification. You got trouble. You probably need to react.
That's right.
But we're not done there, right? We're still going to go out and figure it out and start pumping out protection to all our customers.
That's right. That's right. Look, that is about saying, look, you have a breach in your environment. When we talk about what is the remediation and what is the protection, SEP, the Symantec Endpoint Protection Client itself, will have, let's call it signatures, but they're not simple like string signatures that basically are trying to recognize these files and block them. And in fact, the number one way SEP is blocking, or maybe two ways that SEP is blocking WastedLocker, are sort of generic in nature. So you have to remember that these guys, this binary, this ransomware binary, is not the same. They are building it uniquely for each environment that they're in. Okay. And so the way we actually are able to block it is twofold. So one is our reputation technology. So every file that comes in, we calculate a reputation for it. Is it good? Is it bad? How prevalent is it? Who is using it? Are only users who get infected a lot using it? Or only clean users using it? Do we see this in consumer environments, enterprise environments, all kinds of attributes? And then calculating reputation. You have to remember this ransomware, this WastedLocker ransomware is being specifically built for these organizations. So it's going to have a very low reputation. Basically, we're going to be like, we never see this anywhere. We're not seeing anyone use this file. This is the first time we've ever seen it, and it will have a low reputation and then potentially get blocked.
It's like a jujitsu, right? We're using their strength against them.
That's right. That's exactly right. The fact that they're thinking to themselves, hey, we'll make this custom built binary that's not quote unquote detected by anyone, never seen in the world. We're using that aspect to actually say, look, you shouldn't actually use this in your environment. Right. And then the second thing that we're doing is we have a behavior blocking engine. As soon as that ransomware tries to run, it needs to do its behavior, which is open a bunch of files and encrypt them. And our behavioral engine basically just looks for that pattern. If we see a file, open a bunch of files and encrypts them, we will simply go, this looks like ransomware, and we'll block it. So it doesn't matter how you obfuscate it, how you change the file. Ultimately, if you want to be ransomware, you're going to have to open a bunch of files and encrypt them. We're going to look for those behaviors and block it as well.
So I think about it if like, people call it AV, right? File scanning. You've got our signature based. That may buy you some time. They may be able to have a signature for the first one or the second version, but as they keep coming up, if they're on your network, they can come up with endless versions of it till there's one you don't have a signature for, right? You haven't seen, or you can't match a pattern somewhere. So this is where the behavior and the reputation technologies are really important. And so that's going to be, I don't mean to make this a product pitch, but we should be kind of clear. That's in the basic SES products, Symantec Endpoint Security. And then if you move up to the complete with the EDR, you start getting the that TAA capability to do this stuff on your own, and also kind of the early warning on the stuff we've done around. I have a screenshot. Right. Should I put that up? Is that?
Yeah, sure.
This is let me find it here. Sorry. Here we go. So this is from the EDR. So this is what one of the notifications would look like. Is that right?
So this is exactly what you would get. So you can see at the top it says active WastedLocker ransomware attack. Normal TAA incidents wouldn't be as descriptive. They might just say something like a breach using PowerShell and some other attributes. But here you can see it says analyst reviewed in the center, and that means a human had looked at it and then was able to ascribe that this is WastedLocker and you should be careful. And then in the description, there's a little bit more information of what we saw exactly. So you can see we saw Cobalt Strike and PowerShell usage and a little bit about the file names used.
So we put it all together. This is high priority. Yes, you've been breached. Here's the details. You better get going, right?
Yeah, and for anyone who's using our EDR product, then beneath that, they would actually have all the machines, all the behaviors that we correlated together for them to investigate.
Great. Okay, so was there anything? So you got the living off the land and all the other parts of it, and so there's somebody that just saw used the TAA to kind of find those different pieces and put them together and understand what it means. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, what happened was we saw these TA alerts going out to these very large US organizations, and that triggered the threat hunting team, who are normally doing triage, to say, oh, this is a priority. We better take a look at this more deeply. And then they were able to basically, using artifacts, map it into WastedLocker, and then eventually EvilCore.
Okay, so we've protected our customers. We've stopped the actual encryption from happening. We got them in time. I mean, in some regards, that dwell time gives us time to catch them, right? We've got the right tools to actually look at, the attack, see them moving through the network, find those little pieces and stop them before the payload comes down. So that's great for our customers. What do we do for everybody else, right? Obviously, we put research out there. Are there other things that you can talk about in terms of what we did to kind of help protect everybody?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that we always do, and that we did in this case. So first is we try to publish the information, including IOCs, indicators of compromise. So if you go up and find our blog, for example, at the end, you will find things like hashes, domains. Sometimes we even publish things like Yara signatures, which can be helpful to some organizations. And then, of course, all of this information as well, including the actual samples we see and more sort of lower level raw malicious data, whether it's telemetry or command lines that they ran or the Cobalt Strike binary they used, network traffic for their command and control. We share with other security vendors as well. Mm-hmm. And that's just part of something that we've always done. It's a whole consortium of security vendors. We know that not everyone is our customer, and it's always in all of our best interest to try to protect people from these actors in general. So we'll share that information with them, so they can update their own products in time as well to make sure things are protected.
Right.
And then, in general, we also try to do shutdown notices. So if there is, for example, a command and control servers being utilized here, we will try to notify those organizations to say, look, your machine has been breached, or you're a hoster who's hosting a malicious command and control server, and you should shut them down. And so, for example, in this case, one of the first ways you would get infected is through these newspaper websites, and one of these organizations were breached. And so we obviously notified them right away to get them to clean up their website, so it would no longer be delivering the threat to begin with. And then there was some sort of backend infrastructure as well, some sort of command and control servers being hosted by some web hosters. We reached out to them, and they shut those down as well. It's not going to be the end of EvilCore for sure. It's not going to be the end of WastedLocker. We consider these things as short-term disruptions. These guys will reset up their infrastructure and come back and continue.
Yeah, I was going to say, hey, this is old news now. They're taken care of. We don't have to worry about it anymore. Unfortunately, just not the case.
Yeah, not the case. And especially for this group, we know from history. It's not, some other groups maybe, if they're brand new, just starting out and trying something, maybe they'd be like, oh, this is too tough. I'm going to give up. This group has been in operation for a decade. They will continue to come back.
It's funny because I see, we reported a real shift from BEC attacks to phishing attacks around COVID and all sorts of scams around that, and yet the dollar amount that was being stolen through BEC attacks actually went up. And the way I think about it is that the people that are really good at business email compromise attacks and making lots of money, they're still doing it, and they're getting better, and they're making more money. And everybody that got into it because they thought they could make fast money, and they turned out they weren't that good, they could cause a lot of damage and disruption. But if it's not that profitable for them, they'll jump onto whatever the next thing is, right? And the EvilCorp isn't kind of going to jump onto the next thing. They're here, they're going to stay, and they're pretty focused on what they do. I think, let's see, I think we'll look for questions at this point. Does that,
Okay,
does that
let's
make
do it.
sense? Let's see, I gotta find which is the right one to look at. Here we go. Okay, so here's a question. If a human alerts on something in the EDR, TAA, that is the technology. So how can a customer engaged learn more about how to follow up on the incident with a threat hunting team?
Okay,
Sorry,
so
really
I think
specific, but I think it's worth answering.
yeah. So I think there's a couple of things here. So first, sort of, let me answer it in general, whether it's this or any other attack. Most of our customers should have a support contract in play. Anytime SEP or EDR, anything is detecting something in your environment, anytime you believe you are breached, anytime you believe you're breached and maybe there's not protection available or you're suspicious about something, you definitely should be going in to your support contact. There's a whole team here at Symantec. That's what we're doing here every day, taking inquiries about people submitting us samples that are suspect, submitting us log files, images, things like that to investigate, to determine if there's some attack, to which we roll out protection. And then the second thing is there is something special here, right? So, the threat hunting feature as part of EDR and TAA as part of EDR is a new feature. And we do actually have a Lighthouse program available where there is some additional notification and engagement between actual humans, between basically people in SOCs in organizations and our threat hunting team directly. So there's a little bit of a Lighthouse program going on there. It is something maybe you can ask your salesperson about. It is limited. So, it's something that we're testing out right now as well. So that might be something someone is interested in.
Great. We had a question on the attribution. I mean, how can we talk about how we attribute it to Evil Corp or our confidence level that it is them behind this?
Yeah. So we actually have shared command and control infrastructure in sort of a couple of places. One is just after the delivery through the watering hole, and then later through sort of back-end command and control. So this is infrastructure that we have attributed to Evil Corp in the past that is being utilized. In general as well, just at a more high level, which is maybe unnecessary because we do have this shared infrastructure, this is their playbook as well. Using Sakulish, they used to do something called Dridex, delivering it in, how they do lateral traverse. They used to do something called BitPaymer, which was a different piece of ransomware they were using. Just the general targeting and the nature in which they work is also very similar. But there is specific shared infrastructure here that we saw utilized.
Makes sense. I mean, I think there's always room for argument, but in the end of the day.
Well, look, with this, let's call it group, there is a bit of room for argument because again, where do you draw the circle around this group? Look, they've been around for a decade. There's definitely possibilities that there's members of the group that spun off. There's other people that joined. So it's like, how do you draw a circle around the group? But yeah, there's association here with Evil Corp for sure.
Yeah, and ultimately, we're not in charge of arresting anybody, so that's for other people or proving in a court of law.
The FBI put in an indictment on these guys. We'll see, if later they begin to add more to that indictment for further attacks that they've been conducting.
Right. Okay, so I got a question about the value of a target. How do you differentiate between a non-value target and a valuable target in the initial stage? I guess I guess that could be the watering hole attack, or I guess it could be once you get into the organization.
Let's talk about both. Let's just talk about both. So for these attackers, the way they're determining if it's a target of interest is they have actually done the reconnaissance. They have built up a list of organization names that they're interested in. Many of these are high manufacturing, and many of them are just popular brand names, that people would know. They have built up that list and then have determined what is their network segment. Okay, so they basically determine what is the IP address space that this company owns. And so when you're browsing the web, if you're VPN into your organization, these days working from home, or if you're sitting in the office, you're coming from usually a known IP address space owned by that company. And so if they see that, then they deliver the threat to you.
Right. Actually, it's interesting because if you're working from home, but you're not going through the VPN, you probably can't identify your company, right? But you're doing the right thing, going through the VPN. We would never advise anybody not to do that. It's the right thing to do. but that does enable them to kind of know which company you're working for.
Yeah. There is some people, we don't have any solid data behind this, but there's some people hypothesizing that this effect is even worse now today with COVID and working from home, in that people are on their work machines and doing a lot of personal browsing while they're VPN'd in and at home. They have one machine instead of switching to a personal machine like they might used to when they were at the office. They would go home and maybe have a different machine at home. They're like, I'm ready sitting here in front of my computer. It's already on, and they just use that to browse the web. The web generally. Remember, most of these infections came in through newspaper websites. It's not like some business website.
Well, I think there's things you probably wouldn't browse if you were sitting in the office that you would at home as well.
Yeah, potentially.
Maybe a factor as well.
To the second part, potentially, of that question, which is, how do you find high-value targets within an organization? How do you find things like domain controllers and file servers and things like that? They're using off-the-shelf tools. To be honest, it's a program called net.exe on a Windows machine that helps you enumerate all kinds of machines on the network. All of these machines are very nicely named, Exchange Server, File Server X, with the department name or the geography name, things like that. So they're just using normal off-the-shelf administrative tools to enumerate the network.
Yeah, I mean, I think IT is trying to bring organization out of chaos. I suppose it could all give phony names to their Exchange servers, but ultimately it's probably going to be more trouble than it's worth.
Yeah, I mean, what's helping the admin here is helping the attackers, unfortunately.
Yeah. So let's talk about the dwell time then, while they're mapping that out, figuring it out. We're saying it could be anywhere from a week to 6 months, depending on how persistent the group is, how badly they want to be in there, and how much to their benefit it is to wait. Is there an average that we could talk about?
Yeah, really 7 to 10 days is the average we see. And the real big deciding factor is not them. It's not, the attack group that, they were busy that day or they decided to go on vacation that week. The real big factor is really how many hurdles they have to jump through and how well protected an organization is. Mm-hmm. If they can get on a worker machine and immediately escalate and get a domain admin because of some cache password on that machine via something like injecting into LSAS, people might refer to this, Mimikatz, people might refer to that, then they will deploy that ransomware very soon after. So it's really about how long it takes and how many jumps and how many machines and how many user accounts they have to go through before they can get some sort of system-wide administrative account.
Right. So everybody's different.
Everyone's different. Yeah.
All right. So I want to go back. We talked about the product. I'm sorry, I'm trying not to do too much product talk, but I realize I probably confused things. I think we made one of the more ill-timed name changes. We changed the name around the same time that we became part of Broadcom. People are familiar with a product called Symantec Endpoint Protection, or SEP. That name got changed to SES, and so that is the equivalent of SEP today. We were talking about the EDR products, the TAA technology, the threat hunters. We showed that screen, whatever that is. Those are all pieces that are part of something called SES Complete. So just FYI, that's what we're talking about. Sorry if I confused anyone. I just wanted to kind of make that clear. Let's see. Well, your products can protect against penetration, but what if the network? And what if the network is already encrypted? I'm pretty sorry for anybody that's happened to. You want to answer? What can we do if it's too late? The bad guys have already gone in and encrypted everything.
Yeah, so it's twofold things, and it depends on what products you had in there. I mean, to be honest, if our products were in there, for example, one of the things they try to do is they try to delete volume shadow copies. So by default, it depends on the configuration. But on Windows machines, you can have something called volume shadow copies, where basically your Windows machine is automatically making backups, or version backups for you. It can be turned off, and it can be turned on in different ways, and the frequency of snapshots can be changed by administrator. But one of the things they try to do is delete those, because they know those are very often automatically being created. And for example, if you happen to have SEP, no matter if the ransomware was blocked or not, we block their ability to delete those volume shadow copies. And so you can go in and basically restore your files from volume shadow. copies. The second thing, obviously, is backup. Look, you know, you always have to have multiple layers of defense, okay? And I would tell you right now, your final last layer of remediation for ransomware is indeed backups. And if you have backups, then you should be able to restore from backups. That is the way to go. Very few pieces of ransomware today are decryptable. Yes, you can go online and find some ransomware decryption tools, but to be honest, they're mostly for pieces of ransomware where the authors are not very savvy. They've made some mistake in their encryption algorithm, and then we can recover. It's not the case in WastedLocker, and to be honest, I doubt it will ever be the case for anything Evil Corp rolls out. These guys are sophisticated and smart enough not to mess up their encryption algorithms. Once your files are encrypted, you got to go for backups.
Great. So we talked about this, but I see it in the question, so I'm going to section. So I'm going to answer again. We share this information? So yes, it is shared. It is out public. I will put. That's not what I want to do. Sorry. I will put that one up. That's the blog where Eric's told you that all the IOCs and all the SHAs involved in this are all published, and all the details of how they do it. So we've clearly made it public here. We have probably 40 to 50 different organizations that we informally share this stuff with. We're not going to hold it back. This is not how we do competitive advantage. You don't want to work with a company that acts that way, right? Well, we'll protect them and we won't help anybody else, but you don't want to do that. And we have all those groups we share with, and we're even in a formal organization called the CTA that we share data with as well. We're probably going to talk about that because this particular threat was hit a milestone in terms of data sharing at the CTA. So you may see some publicity about that coming out. But absolutely, that we share this stuff with everybody. We're in this to protect everyone, not just our customers. Okay. Let's see. And the last thing on the encryption, the thing you want to do is not get it all encrypted. I realize that happens and it's horrible. You got to stop it. You got to protect from it. It's the easiest way. Okay. How do you detect a useful program that's modifying a huge amount of data, doing something that it probably shouldn't do, but it's a normal program? It's something you see on your computer all the time. Everybody uses that program, but now the bad guy's using it to do something malicious. How do we detect that?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. So I don't want to get into super specifics. There is some value to security through obfuscation. If I tell you exactly how we are blocking attackers, then obviously it allows them to bypass us more quickly. Obviously they can, figure it out eventually, but, we don't necessarily want to help them. But right. In general, there's sort of two things happening. First is, I sort of mentioned it, our behavioral stuff works actually in conjunction with reputation, right? So you have very common programs like normal encryption programs or other backup type programs that can sometimes look a little bit like ransomware. All of those things end up getting, let's call it excluded, or we don't trigger on those things because we can recognize them for their reputation, for their normal widespread usage. Right. The second thing is there is subtle differences in what ransomware does versus sort of normal programs in two ways. The first is they do other things at the same time in preparation or afterwards. Okay, so for example, I mentioned they block those volume shadow copy files. Okay, if you were doing something normal like modifying and adding a watermark to a whole bunch of JPEGs, you're not going to be deleting the volume shadow copy files beforehand. Okay, so there's these subtle things that are happening before and after. Okay. Secondly, during the action, the way they are encrypting, whether it's the actual bytes being modified or more high-level systematic changes, metadata type changes, for example, adding the extensions to the files, those things are subtle differences that we don't see necessarily between someone doing sort of mass data changes versus encryption. All right, so it is a gray line. I won't say that it's 100%, that we never have a false positive. This is a term people are probably used to. We can have false positives, and then we try to make corrections for those.
I would just say, if this is not your father's antivirus, right? We're talking about. If you look at PowerShell today, it was used by these guys. It's used by almost every attack group. If we were doing signature-based detection on PowerShell scripts, we'd be out of business, right? Because they're so easy to change and modify. There'd be so many of them. So, we can react quickly. we have tools to catch stuff that's there, and if we see something get that prevalent, we can just continue to fine tune it. So they're going to move to these new ways. We're going to move as well, and we're going to anticipate what they do as well. So this is just part of the game, and we're well beyond in a protection standpoint of having to create a signature for everything, right? That is so 2007 as far as what we do now.
Yeah, you know what's interesting is the way we're even able to figure out things like, oh, there's all these clean applications that do something similar, and where's the line, where's the threshold, is actually through machine learning. We're collecting all of these behaviors, clean and malicious, and then figuring out what are the subtleties. Those subtleties, to be honest, some of them are determined by expert rules, humans going, oh, maybe this is different. But many, many of them are actually being figured out by computers. Computers basically seeing all these ransomware attacks and what they look like, and seeing all these clean attacks and see what they look like, and then figuring out the subtle differences between them.
Yeah, and that's what makes it so hard for these guys to avoid detection, where you've got to work as hard as Evil Corp works. And in this case, we still got them. We still stopped them.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, do you got a prediction for what we'll see Evil Corp doing next?
They'll come back. Same thing. They'll be back. Same thing. You know, water holing, breaching, vulnerabilities. They do everything. It's not like they just say, oh, we only do water holing, or we only send phishing emails. They'll do anything and everything. But they'll be back, and they'll try to make money any way they can. And right now, the number one way to make money still by cybercrime gangs is ransomware. So we expect that will continue.
Those ransoms are just huge. And every time you read somebody paying them, it's more incentive for everybody else to go out and do it.
That's right.
Yeah. So Eric, we ran a little bit over. We're going to go 45 minutes. Do you got any last words of wisdom you want to share?
No, I mean, the only thing is that these attacks continue. You know, you got to think about layered defenses. It's not a single thing. There is no silver bullet. You got to keep up with what the hackers are doing and keep up with sort of the latest best practices in security.
And for our marketing people, I'm going to add, if you use our products, I think you're going to get a huge advantage in that. But actually, I mean, we're really excited about the ability of the threat hunters to reach right into the products and tell people what's going on, the TAA technology, et cetera. So it's amazing that we'll be able to take tools that we use and get them out to our customers to allow them to use it there. So I'll end up on that. I will encourage people, no, where do I want to go? There we go. The blog's up there, but there's also a whole lot of other stuff that you'll see in the attachment tab. Really appreciate everybody's time today coming in, the questions. If we didn't get any questions answered, like I said, I'll follow up. I'll answer them in an email to you. Happy to do that as soon as I get through them all. And really appreciate your time. Want you to stay safe out there, stay vigilant, and thanks very much for joining us today.